Hello, everyone, and welcome to the HealthyXSundays podcast, where we bring to you the most critical and actionable content in the nutrition and fitness space. Dave from Mind Muscle Pro and I, Kunal Jain, also known as Veg Diet Coach, are your hosts. In this episode, we are excited to welcome Poshini Agasthya, a specialist in low carb nutrition, integrative dietetics, and functional nutrition. Poshini helps clients overcome health challenges, including neurodegenerative issues through personalized, sustainable plans that focus on root causes. Her expertise in healthy ketosis, low carb diets, and intermittent fasting, combined with certifications in nutritional therapy, herbs, and stress management, equip her to guide individuals towards long term wellness. Join us as we explore her holistic approach to health and well being. So, welcome to the show, Poshini.
Thank you, Peran.
So, Poshni, what inspired you to focus on the connection between nutrition and mental health in your practice?
That's a very interesting story and a personal story as well, Kunal. My interest in focusing on mental health specifically comes from watching a family members struggle with schizophrenia for over 28, 30 years. And it was very hard in the family to watch this disease progress with its many ups and downs, and to feel the helplessness of not having any solution at the end of any kind of treatment. And believe me, we've tried a lot of treatments. So that is what really inspired me to look for the connection between food and mental health. And along with that research, I also started realizing that it's not just people who have a diagnosis of any particular mental illness or a neurodegenerative disease that struggle with aspects of any kind of mental health. Today, it's a very widely spoken topic. People use the word mental health very lightly, but there are many layers to it. There's a lot of aspects that can be coped up. Simple things like anxiety, not being able to tolerate stress itself can lead to a lot of problems, but food has a good solution in it.
Rightly said. So, how do you navigate this balance between promoting these so called alternate dietary approaches while challenging mainstream dietary guidelines?
One of the first things I think, Kunal, we need to realize is we're not challenging any mainstream dietary approach. We are trying to bring into focus on density of nutrition, right? If we start labeling these things with a particular diet, for example, then there is a mental mind block to it, right? So when
Yes.
you teach people that, you know what, this is how you're supposed to eat, these are the ingredients in your food that you need to focus upon. And if that is all that you're able to ensure that your focus remains with, it first of all doesn't feel like a diet. Second of all, when people start noticing different things, when they start noticing things that get better, it becomes a lifestyle choice.
Yes.
Somebody who doesn't drink water, let's take a simple example at all. And one day, they use an app and drink 8 glasses of water. They feel that difference, and you don't need to convince them or talk to them or promote them to, follow that.
Absolutely. So, what are some misconceptions about the relationship between food and mental health which you encounter with the people you work with?
The direct relationship between food and mental health has a lot of misconceptions. There are varied schools of thoughts, and everything can feel very convincing, right? Everybody has some amount of science, a portion of science that is backed up with what they want to talk about, what they want to share about. but end of the day, to understand what really caused the problem in the first place, and that requires a lot of understanding of a good history of their health, and it also requires to understand what is their current health approach. Now, to give an example into this concept, uh, there is, a vegetarian, for example, right? Now, keto automatically associates with non-vegetarian, right? With meat, eggs, poultry, fish.
Right.
And it can be impractical to thrust this upon to somebody, right? So we need to figure out different ways in which we can incorporate what they require and try to help them. And there's a spectrum of low carb diets, even just reducing 50% of somebody's carbohydrate intake. If they're consuming, let's say, X grams per day, even just X by 2 grams can show them some results. End of the day, we cannot be perfectionist. End of the day, we can't strive towards something that's extremely stringent, because you can sustain that only for a short period of time. So when that person is in that extreme stringent phase, if you can work on the other aspects about their health, it could be gut related issues, it could be toxins, it could be deficiencies that they have incurred as a result of various other things. Help them change other lifestyle, like if they're dealing with a lot of emotional and mental trauma, helping them work through with that in various means. You get that window which can work in your favor, and I think that is really important on how you can take somebody through the dietary approach. I don't like to call it a diet. I
Yes.
like to call it lifestyle, because if something works for you, you tend to follow it, right? It needs no brainer.
Absolutely. And that's why I think the name lifestyle parivartan.
That is why lifestyle parivartan. Parivartan means to fundamentally transform. There are many times that we don't realize. We have come following things that our parents did, with or without knowledge, and they followed and adapted what was convenient for them from their grandparents. They followed and adapted what was convenient from them. And if you look at the history of just these two generations, right, they came out of independence, they were in poverty. That there's so many factors, and then very easily we say, oh, this is what we've been doing all our life and all our generations.
Right.
So, yeah, but fundamental change, a person, if they can understand and follow through, and it's just a matter of lifestyle.
Right.
Uh, could you share some success stories in your practice where implementing dietary changes had a significant impact on a patient's mental well-being?
So I don't like to take anybody's names, but I can give
Fine.
you instances of people who approach me for various other issues. I'll give you three different kinds of success stories that I see. One, people who come to me with typical weight loss, PCOS, thyroid related issues. They do have certain aspects of their health that they're dealing with at a mental level. You won't classify them as somebody who's in depression or has anxiety or any of these terminologies, right? However, these people notice a lot of change in their mental health in two aspects. One, they talk about, I can handle my stress much easier, right? Previously, this amount of stress I was not able to handle, but currently I'm able to handle. And I think that itself is the first aspect of mental health and transformation that we see. With people who actually have schizophrenia, I worked with people who have schizophrenia. We've seen completely all their symptoms of hallucination, suspicion, anxiety, all of these just disappear once they are well into the state of ketosis. And that can take anywhere between 3 to 6 weeks. And yes, in some cases, it can take longer as well. But it does really become a very stringent diet. And I've had people who have been on the ketogenic diet for schizophrenia for over 2.5, 3 years and all of that. And it works, right? And I don't need to keep convincing them to stay in ketosis. They feel good. They've gone off, they've had a so-called normal food or food that they were used to in the past, and they notice that difference. So that is one more instance. Worked with certain autistic cases, ADHD cases in pediatric, like very young children, less than 8, 9 years. And what we see is a lot more balance in their hyperactivity level. We see certain cognitive developments. I have definitely seen tremendous amount of comprehension improve in these children, and these are really big milestones when we're talking about people with any of these diseases. So these are some of the successes that I could talk about, but you need to understand that this success is not mine. It was their work that they put in. It was the effort that maybe the family together, the parents, it could be the support system that they were able to create, because it's not easy to stay in ketosis and work through this. And it definitely not single-handedly my effort. It was the support system, functional medicine practitioners, as well as me together, working as a health coach, that made it possible for them to succeed by, kind of simplifying all of these. Because when you think of a diet, people automatically complicate it in their head. Oh, okay, so what should I eat? Oh, should I not eat anything? All of these things can overwhelm somebody. And once they actually get into the practice of following the given chart, not the diet chart, but a lifestyle chart, they get better at it, and they understand that, okay, it's not as complex. I can still eat the flavors that I'm used to. It's just limited to certain items.
Right. So, mental health is not a very well-known topic in India. It's like it's not understood at all, to be frank. So, with that comes a level of skepticism, right? So, especially when you say there's a nutritional approach, people take it with a pinch of skepticism. How do you deal with that?
So, I don't really like to force anybody into a school of thought, because when anybody is diagnosed with any mental illness, there is a lot of shock that they have to deal with, and the family as well. It is a taboo in India, right? Even if somebody were to have diagnosed with something, any kind of mental illness, automatically there are people within the family or within the close circle of friends that don't want to disclose this to others because of fear of judgment, because of fear of not being accepted, or because of fear of what if they talk about me? What if they tell about me? And all of these things, right? So many a times, what happens is, even for the medical treatments, there's a lot of skepticism. They don't understand why they need to take regular medication. So there are two ways of this. Added to that, when we say that you can find relief if you change your diet, and food is, people love food in India, right? It's very hard for them to imagine that changing the way they have been eating, because most people tend to feel that they eat healthy. They eat like normal, they eat like everybody else. So why am I the only person getting this disease or getting this diagnosis with this particular mental health disorder? So there is a lot of skepticism. People don't readily accept it. However, we should be grateful for Dr. Chris Barmer, Dr. Georgia Eid, Shabani Sethi, a lot of other people who are talking more about how you change your food, change your mind, how you can. There is awareness now that is being created. And I think somewhere people are open to exploring other aspects. There is an awareness that food can contribute, but to what extent, how, what food? These are the things that I don't think people have direct answers to. Nimhans, if you're aware of, the best institute in India, They have a wing that does metabolic psychiatry. They have had integrative psychiatry with Ayurvedic practices, and this is not happening for the last few years. It's been happening for decades. So there is awareness about this, but how can a person apply it, get accustomed to, and make it a lifestyle change? I think that is where we have the most work. When people come and ask me, will it really help? One thing I do is, if any of my clients are willing to talk to them, I open them up to each other, because I think that's the best thing that anybody can have access to, directly asking people who have struggled. And the second thing is, you give people enough inputs, you give people enough amount of information, and they notice it for themselves. They're able to take that leap of faith because they have seen enough evidence. There are going to be skeptics. There are going to be people who are going to say, I don't think this would work. I don't think this is for me. Most of the time, I sincerely believe that most of the time people are struggling with, can I do it, rather than will this work, right? Because it bottom line boils down to that. And that's where skepticism can be at its highest. And of course, certain dietary ways in which we can help people can go so against what they used to. And it is scary to change something so drastically, because there is always the fear that, okay, I solve one problem, what if I create another problem? And I guess that's the role of a coach, right? That's the work we all do. We need to talk to people, help them ease out on their fear, give them enough examples. And this is where walking the path before or ahead of them has helped, because having made those changes, sustained through, fallen off the wagon, try to climb back, figure it out, that life cycle helps to give enough, I won't say motivation, to give enough hope to help another person walk along. And I think that becomes the most important aspect,
Right.
dealing with skepticism.
So you mentioned about a ketogenic diet. The previous question also mentioned about dietary changes. So how much of a role does fasting have any significant impact in this case?
Of course. Fasting is, I believe, the only way you can go into ketosis, and it's the fastest way you can go into ketosis as well, right? Having said that, being on a ketogenic diet plan can keep you nutritionally fed enough to stay in that. End of the day, ketosis is a starvation mechanism or a defense, a starvation response in our body, right? So a ketogenic diet feeds a portion of the starvation, feeds your muscle with enough proteins, feed your body with energy through fats. There is vitamins and minerals and all of these things. And you can continue to stay in a state of ketosis even when you eat food. However, for most people, a cyclic ketosis of fasting regularly, intermittent fasting, longer fast, is more than enough to help them through as well, right?
Right.
And unless there are very serious metabolic syndrome or other metabolic challenges, then you need to look at also putting a person on a ketogenic diet plan. Fasting is my first approach for people. Then, depending on the condition, I would put them into a ketogenic plan, or just keep them at a moderate to low carb diet with enough nutrient emphasis to help them through.
Right.
Right. So, Poshini, I wanted to ask you that there's definitely a connection between metabolic health and your brain health or mental health. So,
Yes.
before we get to what are the good brain foods which help you keep a healthy brain, do you want to talk about generally which are the kind of foods which people are consuming which can lead you down to these neurodegenerative paths?
Right. That's actually an excellent question. So, if somebody wants to preventively take care of their mental health, I would suggest them to avoid inflammatory foods. Now, uh, if you have food allergies, definitely work upon that. Keep that away from your diet. Any kind of inflammatory foods like the most common inflammatory foods are things like wheat, dairy. These are some of the things that can really create havoc for people with their gut health, right? The most common allergens, though, are shellfish, poultry with eggs, dairy, wheat, gluten predominantly. So, figure out what doesn't work for you, stick to that. And also, I think the most pro-inflammatory food are all your processed foods, right? From the source, the least amount of processing that it requires, the better it is, right?
Right.
And that is the reason why non-veg can come on top, because it's the least amount of processing required for you to consume it. But there are alternate foods that is available that require lesser processing that can still be consumed. However, I don't like to label anything as totally bad. It is a very individualistic approach. When we tell people that this is something you could eat occasionally, it's understanding that word occasionally that matters more. For some people, occasionally means 3 times a week. For some people, it's once a week. For some people, it's once in 2 weeks. And for me, it's once or twice a year. So, the term occasionally is very liberally used in these cases. However, staying away from processed food and focusing on whole foods, I think, is the first step towards taking care of your mental health.
Right.
So, if I understand correctly, you were a vegetarian for the longest time. You are from a vegetarian family, right?
Yes.
So, and it is very common knowledge that there is very less healthy fats in a proper vegetarian diet. So, have you been able to pick out any patterns where you see these cases higher on the vegetarian side? Like, is there any pattern you picked out? You see vegetarians with more of these cases.
I don't like to conclude and say that, yes, I've seen more vegetarians who have mental health issues. I've seen a good mixture. But that also stems from culturally in India, we don't eat, even a non-vegetarian would probably eat only once or twice a week. And that's if they can afford it. It is expensive, right? So, and then culturally, it's not as widely accepted as well. So I don't like to term and say, okay, only vegetarians have more mental health issues, because a good, well-planned vegetarian diet with good gut health, if somebody has taken care of and not abused it with food colors, additives, processed food, and all of this, can still have very good mental health. And at the same time, and if they haven't created any of the metabolic issues with decent exercise, with good sleep hygiene, and being able to manage their stress levels well, then low carb is not like a one size fit all for everybody. It's not needed. At the same time, I can't even say that, there is a particular demographic of people that don't get mental illness as well. So anybody can be affected with it, because we need to understand that one way of looking at mental health in the neuro aspect is that it is an insulin resistance of the brain. That's one approach towards how you can go about in the treatment of mental health.
Right. So, what kind of foods are good for the brain, for brain health?
That's a very interesting question, Kunal, because we always look for this, right? Before, when I was much, much, much younger, and when I was, okay, what is a good food for my hair? What is a good food for my skin? Now we all want to know what is good food for our mental health. And I wish there was one thing that would, magically make our mental health better. But that one magical thing is actually fasting. Okay, so if you want good mental health, I would say don't eat at all. However, you have posed an interesting question, and I'd like to answer it by saying that the more diverse amount of nutrition that a particular food can provide, that would be a good choice. Better quality of fats would also be a good choice, because our brain is majority made out of fat, and the nutrients that are carried through fats is what it requires to thrive upon. So that gets delivered more easily to the brain. And so there's not going to be one answer from me because, you know, there are a lot of food choices that a person can have.
Okay,
Absolutely.
but you can when it comes to fats, like what are we talking about? Is it saturated fats, omega 3, omega 6? What are we talking
Yeah.
about for the audience?
Yes, omega-3 DHA plays a very vital role, and I will put it up at the topmost level. Supplementation also can be an option for people, but if somebody is really not get the system that converts fats into DHA in your body working really right, vegetarians can consider ghee, but work out a lot. If you're consuming ghee, ensure you're working out quite a bit.
Right. So just can you expand a little more on the fasting part, since you consider that as a very important pillar?
Yes.
What types of fasting help here for a beginner, maybe start from a beginner?
So I think the most researched form of fasting is the 16 8-hour pattern, where you restrict your eating window to 8 hours, and 16 hours you are only on liquids, and that too liquids that do not carry calories. So no fruit juices, vegetable juices, no tender coconut water, and all of that. So just plain water, some herbal teas, electrolytes in the form of salts, minerals, things like that, right? Um, Though we have a lot of research material based on the 16-8 fast, it can still be difficult for some people, right? So my first approach to people is just to wind up your dinner as early as possible and try to get in the minimum of 10 hours of fasting from dinner to breakfast. Start with that, right? There are many people who don't do that. They have a glass of milk, they have buttermilk, they snack, they munch, they do all of these things. So let's get that foundation right, get 10 hours in place first. Then slowly move it to 12 hours, slowly move it to 13 to 14 hours. Then I tell people, be comfortable how long you want to fast, how extended that you would like to fast for. Uh, Before you know it, it takes somewhere between 2 to 3 weeks. People are very comfortable at 16 hours. 15 to 16 hours becomes, cakewalk for anybody once they understand this. But the key to fasting is that feeding period, how much of nutrition you're eating.
Absolutely.
I have had people who come and say, "Oh, I did intermittent fasting, but I ate a pizza, I ate a burger," and I'm horrified, right? Because you're fasting and taking the benefits of the detoxification process, but you're feeding in junk. So I do have a very interesting analogy where I tell people, you have imagine a nice glass pipe that you have. There was a lot of shit in it, and you clean it up with your fast, but then you're again putting in some more shit through that because of the choices of the food that you do. So uh, for mental health benefits, anywhere between 17 to 18 hours is important. And it can be difficult to sustain that because the calorific requirement that you need does also play an important role. If you're just trying to squeeze in a lot of nutrition within 6 hours of eating window, 4 hours of eating window, or even just 1 hour of an eating window, it can be hard on the system to kind of eat that. Like, we don't have theoretically our stomach can expand and contract, but it can feel very heavy. And this is where food choices that are nutritionally dense become very important. And I do encourage people to fast for 24 hours at least once or twice a week. And that can be very beneficial for your mental health. This is how you start. You can go up, you can do 3 days water fast, you can do 24-hour dry fast, no water as well. There are various fasts that a person can do. And I like to work with them because if somebody is extremely in a stressful environment, if there's work stress, family stress, or whatever stress, I don't want to push them very high on the fasting scale as well.
Right.
Just to add a point for our audience, uh, just have to mention this, that anybody who is taking diabetes meds or anything, just do fasting under supervision.
Yes, it needs a lot of supervision for anybody. They're not just for somebody who is diabetic, because not that there's side effects to fasting, but it can create some kind of uh, panic when they come upon any kind of effects, because it is an intense detoxifying process. Have you guys worked with any of the mental health cases? Maybe you guys could also share some of the experiences or your own experience.
My own experience with mental health, Poshini, has been that when I was severely obese, I did have a lot of anxiety, bad mood, getting brain fog in the morning, right? Being very irritated all the time, not having energy, motivation. It was a very common aspect of my life. And probably the mental aspect of my life, more than the physical one, prompted me to start making changes and start taking care of my health, my
Right.
metabolic health. So I had some severe problems, which I didn't know why it was happening. But I'll tell you, the moment I started cleaning up my nutrition, my sleep, started thinking positively, started doing strength training, the amount of mental health benefits I saw immediately were just amazing. I was thinking, why wasn't I doing this earlier? Why I was in a sort of this abyss, or
Right.
in quicksand where I cannot really come up. So so I'm a very big advocate of just you know nutrition, and as food is medicine, right?
Yes.
We all believe in that.
Yeah.
So in my case, absolutely. I mean, I'm a different person after I've dropped all the excess fat in my body and cleaned up my food and started exercising. So absolute tremendous benefits.
And we do see this very commonly, right, Kunal? We see that the way our entire life is designed. So just take the life cycle from transition from childhood, young adulthood to adulthood, right? The way the competitive world is right now designed. I do work with quite a few students, in the age gap of 13 to 22. And it is very unfortunate that their entire schedule is kind of stepping them up to have mental health issues. They don't tend to get time for workouts, they don't get time to fit in their work, and added with the whole social media pressures that they tend to put onto themselves, and have feeling the need to show up and be present. There are so many things that, as our life has become easier, that have also gotten more complex. And yes, we do have lesser quality food available for us today.
Absolutely. Like you brought up the topic of kids, 10-year-old kids. You can see that obesity is common now in
Yes.
young children.
Central
And
obesity, especially with young children. Yeah.
absolutely, central obesity. And just imagine these kind of problems used to happen when people were in their mid-age, 40s and 30 years maybe. And the more serious problems like Alzheimer's and diabetes was even further up, 50s and 60s. So, like you said, our environment is so poisoned now. The food we eat, the air we breathe, the toxins everywhere. It has really pushed all these age limits so low now that it is an alarming situation. It's like an epidemic now, metabolic health issues, and it's happening in children, which is really sad to see. And parents, because they don't have awareness, they don't have knowledge, they've been, like you said, they've been following the same patterns in their generations, the same eating patterns, and it's only getting worse now. with
You
time.
also see another aspect, Kunal, where parents are trying to overcompensate. I do see a whole lot of parents who come from this saying that I wanted to eat that chocolate, but my mom didn't buy it for me, or my dad didn't buy it for me because they said that that's waste of money and we need to buy a house, or we need to secure our future, we need to educate you. And there they're trying to overcompensate to their children now, and they say that I didn't get to eat, but you eat right now, and I will provide for you. I think that is a big thing that people are not talking about. Somewhere that saying that I didn't have, let my child have. While that has a very, good thought behind it, I think in the food aspect, it's not going well.
Exactly. I mean, the parents, for the lack of time and pressure in their jobs, they try to get to the low-hanging fruit of just feeding their children, right?
Right.
And for grandparents, it's even more that even if the parents say that, okay, let them not have sweet
Okay.
stuff and junk, grandparents will spoil them, right?
Yes.
Because for them, it's like, yeah, it's natural. It's a natural thing,
Grandparents, aunts, uncles, everybody.
right? And the podcast we had before this, which we talked about on autism with Mrs. Saswati Singh from Mysore, she said that in her case, she has seen if the one of the parent said, okay, on the birthday, let's have cake, give cake, that caused 6 months of suffering for the family just because of giving a bit
Yes.
of cake
That's
to an
sugar. Yeah.
autistic child.
To
So
an autistic child. Yeah.
so it's ultimately boils down to your choices, right? It's emotions and practicality of the situation you are handling in your family.
You're absolutely right, because I've heard some really twisted versions of this from parents. I've heard parents say that, I want to provide my child with Maggie and biscuits at home so that, they don't go and behave bad like they haven't ever seen this food and overeat in front of others. And very ridiculous, right? Because generations of parents and billions of people are raising people with food awareness. I mean, not the best way, but religion itself can promote. Like, you don't see a vegetarian say, eating non-veg in a friend's house as easily. Sure, there are instances where you see this, but it is the way you raise and you teach and you lead by example that matters more than trying to come up with these vague statements to justify what you're doing.
Absolutely. It starts with the parents because children will follow the cue from their parents. So that's where parents need to get educated first. They
Yes,
need to own their health
they need
before.
to own their health. These days, I think parents are well educated, but they are not leading by example at home. They don't make those changes themselves.
Right, and there is this deluge of information, conflicting nutritional information, and due to social media, one reel will say eat this, another reel will say don't eat it. So even parents are confused. At some,
Tell me one thing, Kunal. Against all schools of thoughts, the one thing that's common with everybody is stay away from processed foods, stay away from high sugary foods, stay away from that one thing can be followed no matter what school of nutrition thought a person follows, right?
exactly. So if the principles of nutrition and wellness are solid, the methods can be different. They'll all lead to the same good results. So
And,
first principles, following the right principles matters a lot. Okay, so
and
coming,
fasting is a unifier in all of this.
yeah,
Fasting is a unifier to bring that good balance.
yeah, fasting again is something is I've seen that people like Navratras are going on, right? So fasting can be very different for religious purposes, and fasting can be very different for therapeutic purposes. And most of the time, people think they can eat some food during fasting. I mean, you can have milk tea and all that. They consider it okay, it's just a bit of calories. I can have it. but that really defeats the purpose of fasting. So fasting can be, people do it in the wrong way, or people are just overwhelmed when they think of fasting because we are conditioned to eat 3 to 4 meals a day with snacking. So if you tell them just skip one meal, they will freak out. They'll like, okay, I'll die. I mean, I won't get my calories. So that's the kind of situation people are right now into.
Yeah. The other the other thing which you brought up very interestingly is, people get scared that they're so used to eating 3, 4 meals. When you really ask some people, are you really hungry? Most of the time, at least good 70-80% of the time, the answer I receive is, Kunal, no, I'm bored.
Exactly.
I'm not really hungry, I'm bored. And it stumps me because I also think with the amount of constant inflow of information, constant inflow of screen time, and all of this, we have forgotten to be bored and live to feel bored. We can't have peace. People want to seek something out. They want to stimulate themselves all the time.
Right. It's the dopamine thing, right? People get cheap
People need
dopamine.
a dopamine fast also.
Yeah, exactly. It can be digital fasting. It has
Yeah.
to be there. Otherwise, um, everyone's fallen into a pattern which is very destructive for their physical and mental health.
Yes.
So people need to break that cycle consciously, and then only they'll be able to set an example for themselves and their families.
It needs a lot of mental health work. It needs a lot of emotional health work to feel at peace with just yourself without anything. Just just do this as an experiment if you're in the audience. Stay by yourself without doing absolutely anything. Like let yourself get bored. See how long you can go. Right? And everybody has, no, something will come up, somebody will come up. I have family, I have friends. I'm like, you need to work really, really hard in today's day and age to be bored and to learn to be bored. And it's a skill, it's a lifestyle skill.
It is. Um, I think people should try this method with
You should.
Poshini advice. And people are living in this world of FOMO, fear of missing out. They don't want to miss out on their phone notifications, on whatever is going around them. And that is keeping them hyperactive in their minds, physically. So there's no room for de-stressing. It's only stress. People think stress is everywhere now. So
Yeah.
big challenge.
Yes,
So
fear of missing out is a big thing. And the teenagers have taught me this. So, you know, uh, it is something that everybody needs to work out.
absolutely. So coming back to uh, metabolic psychiatry, nutritional psychiatry, what do you envision as the future of these things?
Kunal, in an ideal world, this would be step one approach before people are put onto medication. Because step one right now, to some extent, is still counseling. So add the counseling with the nutritional intervention. I think that is what I would love to see. However, I do understand that, medically we have a long way to go to that point. And I don't think we have conducive environment in the affordable availability of high quality food sources. Uh, if somebody who's struggling to make ends meet, who's a daily wage earner, for example, they also can have a lot of mental health issues, but they can only afford what is provided for them. They can only afford the cheapest that is possible. And the future ideally would be to challenge these systems and make these and reorganize these systems so that there is better quality of food available at cheaper rates. I think that is the first and foremost. Second thing is we need education for children about simple things, because children who don't, like young adults who don't know to cook, are being taken advantage of advertising of Swiggy and Zomato saying, don't worry, don't cook. order, you know. Uh, and sure, that is bringing in a lot of business, economic growth, but it is also bringing in an wrong way of being okay with the fact that I don't know to cook. It's a pride that people take to say I don't know to cook, and just take yourself back, to the hunter-gatherer age. If you said you didn't know to hunt, and if you didn't know to eat, you died. Today we live in an advantageous time where, okay, you're not gonna die, but slowly you can poison yourself and kill yourself too. Look at it that way. Education of simple things. You don't need to really know how to grow your food. Hopefully, the system takes care of that in better practices. But at least the basic thing about know how to shop for your food, understand to work these things into your routine because it's survival, right? And sure, you can't always have a good five-star fine dine and go out occasionally now that you have the affordability for it. Most people have the affordability for it. But understand that term occasionally. It can't be 2, 3 times a week, it can't be weekly. Understand and respect that. And I think these are the two important things. Just learning to cook, even if they're making a terrible meal that is not, nutritionally balanced, still making it at home versus eating it from outside itself brings down so much of processed food and unwanted ingredients like flavors, MSG, colors, and all of these things.
Right, and you mentioned a very important thing about reading the food labels, basically grocery shopping, because
Yes.
whatever you bring into your house will be consumed. So if people make wise choices when they buy the food ingredients, etc., that actually solves half the battle is won there, I believe, right?
I do envision a time where, family time is not just about going to the mall or going to the restaurant and going to the movies. How about bringing family time together to prepare these things? Most people would pick up jeera powder as opposed to jeera. How about family time comes together? You all make all these powders for the month or for the week. Make these pickles, make these chutneys. Keep this, ready for you because let's face it, our world today requires some amount of convenience. But there is an alternative to find these conveniences, and businesses are making a lot of money. A lot of businesses and startups are coming just to feed into this convenience for you. Great economic for people, great opportunities for people to earn money, but at what cost? At your health? I don't think that is a good trade-off or a good cost.
Right, and the concept of meal prep, that is what can save us from reaching
A
out to
lot.
Swiggy, Zomato, or just going out for meals. It's all about intelligent nutrition and making sure that you have the right ingredients ready to go and just cook the right meals.
In Tier 1 cities, at least, you have in Swiggy app and Instamart, right? It takes the same time most of the time. Just order the ingredients and cook something real quick. By the time it comes, have the things prepped at home, right?
Right,
I'm not totally against this concept of eating out or anything, but at least learn to pick things that would work in your favor, build it up as a habit as opposed to, just going with the flow of ordering and stuff like that.
right. So, talking about like how do you advocate for healthy eating? You spoke so much about it, and recently you had been to a sort of grassroots movement in Bengaluru where GMO
Tumkur.
in Tumkur.
Yeah.
Okay, so in Tumkur where the grassroots movement about against GMO food, right? Genetically modified food. So what is your understanding that how does GMO food, it's everywhere, soy especially, right? Soy protein,
Fine. Yeah.
everything. So what do you want to share with us about GMO and that experience?
Oh, there's a lot, lot to share about it, Kunal. See, having come from functional nutrition training, right, and understanding some basics about my BSc nutrition, okay, so understanding that basics, there was somewhere this knowledge that GMO is bad, and that was it. right? But why is it bad? What are the environmental impacts of it? Because of the environmental impacts, what is it going to create to us as a system of food supply, whether it is vegetarian food supply or non-vegetarian food supply? The next aspect of it is what is the direct implication of these GMO crops to the first people who come in contact with it. So the farmers, right? Farmers and their children. The second step, the people who consume this food, what is the changes that is happening? It's really, if you look at it from the health perspective, it's so multifaceted that the amount of toxin load that ends up getting into your body because of consuming GMO foods is significantly not worth it. Okay.
Okay.
Most of the GMO crops that are coming in are crops that are herbicide tolerant or particular chemical tolerant seed. What does that mean at farming level is, so there is a concept in farming that in the soil, the nutrition should go to the main crop. Any weeds that come up can take away the nutrition, right? So what they do is they used to pull out the weeds. Now that is very heavy on labor. Right now, labor is expensive. So they have herbicides that are sprayed to just kill these things off. However, once this spray falls on the main crop, even that can get destroyed. And now you have the seeds which come that are tolerant of this herbicide, which means spray as much as you want. The main crop's not going to die, but the weeds are going to get washed off. Now, the residue of various toxins in this is something your body has to process because it's gone into the fruit of that plant. Whatever it is, it could be the grain, it could be the seed, it could be lentil, whatever it is, the fruit that you consume from that plant, this excessive exposure has gone into it. Second, there are cancer-causing properties in these herbicides. Another most ecological problem is a lot of varieties, right? How many varieties of, take a simple example, brinjal, how many varieties do you see? How many colors do you see out of it coming, right? These things can get lost over periods of time because not every seed can be made that way. And if now the environmental impacts about it, there's a whole lot more. Honestly, I don't think we have the time for it at all. But a simple bottom line is the amount of toxin exposure goes up significantly. And yes, soy, corn, cotton, these are the things that are heavily sprayed. And I don't think for food crops, GMO should be encouraged at all because we're going to start eating that. And we have seen data of the decline in health with various things. However, the functional medicine, when I try to understand more about what is the understanding, the herbicide tolerance that comes can become herbicide tolerance in us. And some of these chemicals are what are there in antibiotics. So if you are in need of antibiotics, you're tolerant to that, those antibiotics don't work on you, right? So there are multiple facets to this whole GMO thing. Definitely, everybody should take some time and effort to learn about it, to understand a little more in detail about it. But with the little glimpse that I've given you, I can talk about having cancer, toxin load going up, putting a lot of pressure on your toxin removal organs, such as your kidney and your liver, and your lymphatic system, your problems with autoimmune conditions and antibiotic resistance. These are some really serious issues that can crop up as a problem.
Uh,
And these are simple enough reasons why you should avoid GMO.
Thanks for sharing those insights. Really scary, but I think everyone should look into this GMO thing
Yeah.
which is happening. So I think, is there any any research currently you're interested in about nutrition and mental health?
I'm looking forward to more clinical trials coming out on the ketogenic diet, helping various mental illness. And I wish we had more of these research happening within the population of India and within our food demographic. So that is something that I would love to see and come up. Uh, I'm sure it will. It'll just take some time. It's a matter of time.
Absolutely.
So, what are some like what advice would you offer to individuals looking to advocate for their own mental health wellness through dietary choices?
Don't attempt things with half knowledge. Okay. Uh, if you want to attempt it on your own, dig deep, read far and wide, uh, uh, spend time and money understanding properly before you experiment for yourself. Couple of months, a week here and there, obviously is not going to have major lasting problems, a major lasting impact. However, long term, I've seen a lot of clients who come who have experimented on themselves with the keto diet, with low carb diet, and unfortunately they have come with a lot of deficiencies that were in there that have got created, right? Well, the nutrient aspect of it is not as easy to plan out, is not as easy to sustain through. So if you're doing it on your own, please ensure you know enough before you try it. However, the second advice I would say is definitely reach out to people who can help you with this in the right manner, you know. And it's hard to find such people today. There are a lot of people, but go through credible sources, go through people, metabolicmind.org. Websites with .org tend to have more honest information. So you could go through that and reach out to the right people with mental health. Go with a professional, and if nothing else, the medical route is not creating more problems for you. Stick to that until you find somebody. Don't get into this. I saw this video. I heard Poshini say that food can change, or you heard Georgia Eid say food can change your mind, and you jump into it and you remove your medications. You're creating problems not just for yourself, for people around you as well. Let us respect the fact that psychiatry has evolved over a period of time. Sure, it's not the perfect solution, but it works to a certain extent. But there is an alternative. Work on that and then wean it off with the professional. Don't do experiments on your health. It's not worth it.
Right. So I guess it's time to wrap it up, Kunal.
Yeah, be good.
Okay, so are there any questions? We have a few guests listening in. Anyone has any questions? We can enable the audio, or you can just type in your question. Okay. If not, then Poshini, thank you so much for joining us today on the HealthyXSundays podcast. And she is available on lifestyleparivartan.com if you want to reach out to Poshini. And we got some invaluable insights today from Poshini. So thank you again so much. Devi, want to add something?
So it was a very insightful section about metabolic psychiatry, which is like not known at all. So hopefully the viewers get some idea and understand this thing better. We really need to, as I say, when you have metabolic issue, I mean, mental issues, and whenever you have gluten sensitivity, nobody cares about those things. It's very unfortunate to have those things in this country. Nobody believes you have.
True. There's a lot of stigma and taboo that we need to work with. I also want to take this opportunity to thank both you and you, Dev, and Kunal. Am I on? Okay, sorry. Uh, is my audio coming through?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no worries. So yeah, I do thank you guys for this. I hope the podcast, the topics that you have selected, definitely interesting and very educational for people. And you guys are doing good with that. I hope you continue to do more. Metabolic psychiatry is very less, and we need to talk about it in as many situations as possible. And yes, social media has a far wider reach, but my approach is usually one-on-one. That's just the pace that I like things to be at, and the way I work with.
So thanks again, Poshini.
Thank you for this opportunity. You guys, I really hope that, your podcast educates a lot of people with the right information, with practical information, with information that is possible to do, that doesn't mess up and steps on a lot of toes as well, because I think that is what is missing a lot.
Oh, absolutely. And thanks, for the encouragement, Poshini. So with that, thanks everyone for tuning in. Don't miss next week's episode where we'll be joined by another amazing guest. Until then, stay healthy, stay happy, and take care.
Wonderful. Bye.
Bye bye.